Admiral Elena Kovacs stood in front of the panoramic window of the Terran flagship Vanguard, her eyes locked on the swirling mass of the galactic core far beyond. The hum of the ship's engines, the quiet shuffle of boots in the hallway, all faded into a distant buzz. For a brief moment, she thought she could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on her, one tiny human in a sea of incomprehensible cosmic power. Yet here she was, in charge of the most critical mission of her career. The tension in the air was palpable. She straightened, squaring her shoulders and breathing in deep, centering herself. The Vanguard was preparing to dock at the Galactic Council station, orbiting the dead star known as Xenos 11. The Council, an assembly of the galaxy's most powerful, ancient species, had summoned her, a senior diplomat of the Terran Alliance, to discuss a growing issue: the Alliance's increasing defiance of Council mandates. Specifically, the recent trade violations in the outer colonies. Tensions were high, but it was nothing Elena couldn't handle. She turned away from the window, facing her crew and officers. A small but efficient team had been assembled for the trip: diplomats, intelligence officers, military personnel. Everyone on board knew the stakes. The Council had a way of making a mistake feel like an act of war. And no one knew how far they would push this time. "Admiral!" A voice broke her focus. It was Commander Rail, her most trusted tactical officer. His face was tight with concern, his normally calm demeanor disrupted by the gravity of the situation. He handed her a digital tablet, his fingers lingering for a moment too long. "We've intercepted some chatter from the Council. There's word that they might not want to negotiate anymore." Elena glanced at the screen. The news was cryptic but alarming. "What are they saying?" Rail shook his head. "It's vague. But there are indications they may demand more than just reparations for the trade violations. Some of the higher-ups are calling for human punishment, a public example." Elena suppressed a sigh. She'd known this was coming, though she'd hoped the Council's political instincts would win out. The human race was brash, reckless, and at times, audacious. But we also built the first warp drive they couldn't replicate, she thought. We're not to be underestimated. "Keep me updated," she said curtly, brushing past him. "Prepare for docking." As Elena made her way to the meeting chamber, she knew it wasn't just a matter of trade or diplomacy anymore. Something deeper was happening. The Galactic Council, comprised of races far older than humanity, had grown increasingly wary of Terran independence. The Council had always been content with a peaceful, stable galaxy where no species outpaced the others too quickly. But humanity had a habit of pushing forward with an unstoppable force, and that made even the most enlightened of alien species uneasy. The Vanguard slipped into its docking bay with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The moment Elena stepped off the ship, she felt the sudden weight of the Council's station press down on her. It wasn't just the sterile, metallic walls that made her uneasy. It was the sheer magnitude of the place, the cold, calculated nature of the species within it, the quiet hum of their power. The humanoids, the insectoids, and the towering, biomechanical machines all stared at her as if she were an insect under glass. And they were waiting for her to make the first move. Elena's boots echoed in the empty halls as she walked down the corridor, flanked by her two closest allies, Lieutenant Kara Sloan and Senior Ambassador Marcus Varga. Kara was a seasoned military officer, sharp-witted and never afraid to speak her mind. Marcus, on the other hand, was the epitome of diplomacy, calm, collected, always finding the right words when emotions were running high. "Anything?" Elena asked Marcus, her voice low as they approached the Council's assembly room. Marcus gave her a tight smile. "Still waiting on confirmation, but I'm getting the sense that the Council wants to make a statement. They don't just want negotiations, Elena. They want a solution." His voice lowered. "A permanent one." Elena's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden chime of the door to the Council's assembly room. It opened slowly, revealing a circle of alien representatives seated in high, arched chairs. At the head of the room, a figure in elaborate ceremonial robes stood, High Regent Zeron. Elena's pulse quickened at the sight of him. Zeron was the face of the Council's authority. A towering reptilian figure with skin the color of polished obsidian, His eyes glinted like cold stars as they locked onto hers. Despite the absence of facial expressions, Elena could feel his disdain. She had dealt with him before, but never in such a high-stakes situation. "Admiral Kovacs." Ziron's voice resonated across the room, deep and melodic. "You are here to discuss the actions of your people. The Terran Alliance's actions." Elena stood tall, her expression unwavering. "Yes, High Regent. I am here to resolve the recent tensions between our peoples. I understand your concerns, but I am confident that we can reach an agreement that benefits both the Council and the Alliance." Ziron tilted his head, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "You misunderstand, Admiral. This is no longer about benefits. This is about compliance. The Terran Alliance has acted with increasing aggression, flaunting the Council's authority. You have violated treaties. Your ships have trespassed in restricted sectors. You have refused to comply with trade embargoes. And now you expect us to negotiate as if nothing has happened?" Elena felt the room constrict. She glanced at Marcus, who was standing motionless beside her. His face was a mask of composure, but she could see the slight tightening of his jaw. He knew as well as she did that this conversation was quickly veering into dangerous territory. "We have always been willing to work with the Council, High Regent," Elena said, her voice controlled, but she could feel her patience thinning. "However, the actions you reference, our exploratory efforts in uncharted sectors, were made in good faith, with no intention of defying Council authority. My people will not bow to false accusations." Ziron's eyes narrowed, the silence stretching. He was playing a game, as always. The Council never made a decision without a show of power, and Elena knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't going to be a simple diplomatic negotiation. This was about setting a precedent. "Perhaps your people need to be reminded of their place in this galaxy," Ziron said coolly. "I trust the Admiral is familiar with the concept of punishment for those who defy the Council's will. It seems your diplomat, Ambassador Rojas, has made an unforgivable mistake. He violated the terms of the embargo on Pretus 7, and as a result, we have no choice but to make an example of him." Elena froze, a cold fury rising in her chest. "What are you talking about?" Ambassador Rojas was. "The Council has decided," Ziron interrupted. "He will be executed for his crimes. His death will serve as a warning to your people. Do not mistake the Council's patience for weakness." Elena's mind raced, every nerve on edge. This was no longer about trade agreements or boundaries, it was a direct attack on humanity's sovereignty. She felt the icy grip of fear wrap around her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm, to think through the situation logically. She had to act fast, before the situation spiraled completely out of control. "High Regent," Elena said through clenched teeth, her voice sharp. "This is not a matter for execution. You are acting out of a desire for control, not justice. We demand that Ambassador Rojas be released immediately, or there will be consequences." Ziron's smile was cold and calculating. "You will learn, Admiral, that defying the Galactic Council has consequences. And your people will learn it soon enough." A heavy silence fell in the room. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the situation pressing down on her like a vice. She knew one thing for certain, there would be no going back from this. The Council had made its move, and humanity would have to respond. The gravity of the situation pressed heavily on Elena Kovacs as she stood on the command deck of the Vanguard. The cold metallic walls seemed to close in around her as she stared at the glowing holographic map before her. A map of the galaxy, her galaxy. But today, it felt distant, like something she couldn't quite touch anymore. Humanity's fate, her fate, was now on the line. Ambassador Marcus Varga had stepped back into the command center alongside Lieutenant Kara Sloan. Elena's gaze flicked between them both before resting on the map once more. They had left the Galactic Council station hours ago, and yet her mind still reeled from the cold ultimatum they'd been handed. The Council had gone too far this time. But Elena had a choice to make. How far was she willing to push back? "Admiral, you've seen the reports. Ziron isn't bluffing. Kara said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for far too long. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. A resolve that mirrored Elena's own, though Kara was always quicker to voice her anger. They're not backing down on Rojas. Elena's fingers twitched against the edge of the map's control panel, her thoughts working in rapid circles. I know, she muttered. And I should have seen this coming. The Council isn't about diplomacy anymore. This isn't a misunderstanding, they're sending a message. Marcus, his hands clasped behind his back, stepped closer to the table. They've already made their decision. If we let them execute Rojas without consequence, it'll send a signal that humanity will kneel before the Council. We won't be able to undo that. Elena's eyes locked on his. And if we retaliate? The words felt hollow in her throat, as if speaking them out loud would make the weight of the decision all the more real. War Admiral. You know what retaliation would mean. Marcus hesitated, the weight of the next words visible on his face. But we can't be passive anymore. If we don't act, they'll only grow bolder. And we may lose not just Rojas but our dignity, and our autonomy. Kara's voice cut through the tension like a knife. With all due respect, sir, we've been walking a tightrope for years now. Humanity's been on the Council's radar ever since we cracked the quantum engine. Every move we make, every decision, it's been scrutinized. We've pushed too far this time. I don't think they'll stop with Rojas. Elena nodded slowly, her mind already made up, though her chest tightened as she spoke. We fight back. We can't afford to back down. A cold determination filled the room. The words hung heavy in the air, like an inevitable countdown. Kara nodded, her lips pressing into a tight line. Marcus exhaled sharply, but he didn't argue. He was right to be cautious. War with the Galactic Council would be catastrophic. They weren't just any empire. The Council controlled the most advanced technologies in the galaxy, from fleet systems that made human ships look like primitive relics to planet-destroying weapons. Humanity had power, yes, but it was a fraction compared to the forces they would be facing. But in that same moment, Elena Kovacs knew something deeper. She couldn't let humanity fall to its knees. Not for anyone. We don't have the luxury of waiting for the Council to act, she said, her voice hardening. We need to prepare our response. The decision was made, and the Vanguard immediately entered a battle-ready state. The crew moved with precision, the sound of boots pounding against metal floors filling the hallways as Elena oversaw every detail. The operations room was abuzz with activity, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of what was to come. By the time they finished coordinating their response, a deep unease settled in the pit of Elena's stomach. It wasn't just the military implications, she wasn't naive enough to ignore that, but there was something personal about this. Rojas had been her friend. He had been the first to step forward when humanity had been invited into the Council's sphere. Rojas had always believed in diplomacy. And now, the Council had thrown him aside like an afterthought. Admiral. Kara's voice broke into her thoughts again. We've received word from Earth Command. The fleets are mobilizing. They'll back us, but there's no turning back now. Elena's hand gripped the edge of her console as her mind spun. Make sure we're aligned with the fleets. We'll need every ship in the Terran Alliance ready to move the moment we strike. Marcus spoke up from behind her, his voice quieter this time, more thoughtful. Elena, what happens after we fight back? What's the next step? She turned to face him, meeting his eyes directly. We take the Council's response seriously. If we win this battle, we can secure humanity's place. But if they retaliate, we do what we must to protect ourselves. Kara shook her head, her expression fierce. We don't just protect ourselves, Admiral. We fight for our survival. Elena let the words sink in. The stakes had risen from a diplomatic failure to a fight for everything they had worked for. Humanity had always been a species on the brink, pushing the envelope of what was possible, but this was a different kind of push. This was survival. We'll need to hit them hard, she said, her voice decisive. No mercy. No half measures. Hours later, the Vanguard left hyperspace, emerging into the dark expanse of the Pretus sector. The vastness of space stretched out before them, silent, cold, unforgiving. The fleet was in position, hundreds of ships scattered across the void, ready to strike when the signal came. As Elena stood at the command center, she glanced at the holocom system, a small flicker in the corner of her vision. It was a transmission from Earth Command. The face of Fleet Admiral Jessica Howe appeared on screen. Howe was a seasoned leader, someone Elena had worked with closely in the past. The lines on her face told stories of hard-fought battles and countless victories. And now, she wore a solemn expression. "Elena," Howe said, "we're ready. But this isn't a fight we can win easily. The Council ships are equipped with weapons beyond anything we've faced. They'll retaliate with everything they've got. Are you prepared for that?" Elena's lips curled into a hard smile, the kind that came from a place of defiance. "We're prepared. I'll make sure of it." Howe nodded, but the concern in her eyes didn't fade. "I'll be with you every step of the way. Just be ready. We can't afford mistakes." With that, the transmission ended, leaving Elena standing in the quiet hum of the command deck once again. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, but now there was no turning back. The vanguard was prepared, and the fleets were ready. If they didn't strike now, humanity would be destroyed, its sovereignty, its right to exist, wiped out in the blink of an eye. "We're ready to make history," Elena murmured under her breath. Kara looked over from her station, her voice low but filled with fire. "We're ready to make them regret underestimating us." As the countdown ticked down, the final moments before the inevitable battle felt stretched in time. Elena stood, her eyes fixed ahead, waiting for the signal to engage. Finally it came. A single command, a declaration of war. "Engage." The fleet surged forward into the darkness. And the stars seemed to burn brighter. The vanguard moved with precision, its weapons systems locked and loaded. Elena's voice was steady, commanding, as she issued orders to launch the first wave of attacks. It was a calculated move, quick, brutal, and unrelenting. Every ship in the fleet, from the smallest fighter to the massive battlecruisers, moved as one unit, as though they had practiced this moment their entire lives. A massive explosion flared in the distance as the first salvo hit the Council's flagship, a towering presence that dwarfed even the largest of the Terran ships. The shockwave rippled outward, and Elena felt a surge of pride as the humans, for the first time, began to fight back, not just for their survival but for their place in the galaxy. The war had begun. The battle raged on. Admiral Elena Kovacs stood firm in the heart of the Vanguard's command deck, her eyes locked onto the vast expanse of space unfolding before her. The battlefield was a swirling vortex of fire and debris, as humanity's fleet clashed with the overwhelming might of the Galactic Council. Explosions bloomed across the sky like violent stars, lighting up the void with flashes of destruction. Her orders had been clear: strike hard, strike fast, and give no quarter. Humanity's survival depended on it. Elena's breath was steady, though her pulse raced. This was no longer a battle over territory, no longer a diplomatic misunderstanding. The Council had forced them into this fight, and now, the stakes were life or death. "We've lost 2 of the cruisers in the outer ring, Admiral." Lieutenant Kara Sloane's voice came through the comms, her tone clipped, professional. "The Council's fleet is moving in for a pincer formation. If we don't act fast, we'll be surrounded." Elena's knuckles whitened around the armrest of her command chair. The data feed in front of her displayed the positions of every Terran and Council ship in the area, flashing with updates, casualties, and warnings. The odds were not in their favor. But humanity had something the Council underestimated: their refusal to back down. "Divert all remaining fighters to Quadrant 4. Have the cruisers shift to a defensive perimeter. We'll keep them contained. I want our ships at their maximum combat capability. No room for mistakes." Her voice was ice, cutting through the chaos that swirled around them. Kara's voice returned almost immediately. "Understood, Admiral. I'll move the fleet to engage." The line went silent, and Elena was left alone with her thoughts, her gaze fixed on the battle. She could see the Vanguard's cannons fire, sending bright streams of destructive energy toward the massive alien warships. Each strike was a reminder of how far humanity had come, from the early days of space exploration to now, where they faced extinction at the hands of a galaxy that considered them insignificant. A beeping sound broke her reverie. It was a communication from Earth Command. Elena glanced at the screen, her eyes narrowing as Fleet Admiral Jessica Howe appeared. She looked every bit the battle-hardened leader that Elena had come to respect over the years, but now, the lines on her face were drawn tight with strain. "Elena," Howe said, her voice thick with urgency. "The Council is deploying their largest warships to the front lines. We've only got a few hours before they overwhelm us. We need reinforcements." Elena's mind raced. "We don't have time to wait for reinforcements, Jessica. They're already here. We have to hold the line." Howe's face hardened. "I'm sending every available ship we can spare, but it might not be enough. You're dealing with the same fleets that wiped out entire species in the past. The Council won't hesitate to destroy us all if they have to." "I know," Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension. "But I'm not going down without a fight. We'll hold." With that, the transmission ended, and Elena turned back to the battlefield. Kara's voice came through again, urgent this time. "Admiral, the Allegiance is reporting critical damage. We've lost their shields and most of their weapon systems." A sharp pang of loss twisted in Elena's chest. The Allegiance had been one of their finest cruisers. To lose it so early was a devastating blow, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it. "Status of their crew?" Kara hesitated. "All evac teams have been deployed. But they're taking heavy fire. They won't make it much longer. Give them as much time as we can. Launch all fighter support in the area." Elena's fingers flew across the control panel, issuing orders with military precision. She couldn't afford to lose focus, couldn't afford to let the grief take over. The Allegiance might fall, but humanity wouldn't fall with it. The hours stretched on. Elena had long since lost track of time, her world reduced to the rhythmic hum of commands, reports, and the ceaseless din of battle. The Vanguard shook under the force of enemy fire, and yet she held steady. Every fiber of her being screamed to take the fight to the Council's capital ships, but she knew that could only come after they had secured this battleground. "Incoming barrage!" Kara's voice rang out over the comms. Elena barely had time to react. The explosion came seconds later, knocking her from her seat. The deck buckled, the ship groaning under the strain of the blast. Alarms blared, and the emergency lights flickered in the darkened room. Elena cursed under her breath, pulling herself back up to her feet, steadying herself against the console. "Damage report!" she barked, her voice cold, commanding. The damage officer's voice came through, strained. "We've lost main power to the forward thrusters, Admiral. Structural integrity at 47%. Shields holding, but barely. We're not going to last much longer if this keeps up." Elena's eyes flicked to the screen, tracking the advancing Council warships. They were relentless, pressing in from every side. The Vanguard was a beast of a ship, but even it had its limits. And right now, those limits were being tested to the breaking point. "We're not done yet," Elena said, her tone low but fierce. "Patch me through to all fleet commanders. I'll be damned if we go down without making them pay." The Vanguard limped forward, now only a shadow of the battleship it had once been. The remaining Terran fleet had gathered into a small but formidable formation, their collective fury a sharp counterpoint to the imposing Council forces. Elena stood, her face set in grim determination, knowing that each passing moment brought them closer to the edge. The battle had devolved into a brutal slugfest, plasma bolts and missiles cutting through the black void, the echoes of destruction reverberating through the deep silence of space. The once pristine expanse of the Pretus sector was now a hellscape of shattered ships and burning debris. And humanity would not be silenced. "Admiral!" Kara's voice broke through. "The Council's command ship. It's breaking off from the formation. They're moving to flank us." Elena didn't hesitate. "We'll take it out before it has a chance to strike. All remaining fighters, intercept the command ship." We have to hit it with everything we've got. The comms were alive with the crackle of voices as orders were carried out. The remaining fighters, though few in number, surged toward the enemy ship with all the ferocity of cornered wolves. The vanguard followed close behind, its cannons glowing with deadly intent. Elena watched as the battle unfolded before her. The fighters tore into the Council's command ship, focusing all their fire on its weak spots. But it was clear, the Council ship was built to endure, designed to withstand just this kind of assault. We need to finish this, Elena muttered, her hand tightening into a fist. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Reeve, spoke up. Admiral, we've got an opportunity. We've identified a weak spot on their hull, just below the command deck. If we can get a direct shot there, we could breach their core. Elena nodded, her voice firm. Get us in position. Full speed ahead. With a final surge of energy, the vanguard plunged into the heart of the battle, weapons blazing as it charged toward the Council's command ship. The vastness of space seemed to close in as they neared their target, the odds impossibly stacked against them. But Elena Kovacs wasn't a woman who accepted defeat. Fire, she commanded. The vanguard's cannons lit up the darkness, sending a blinding wave of energy toward the Council ship's vulnerable point. For a split second, time seemed to stand still. And then, a massive explosion split the silence, a shockwave that rippled through the battlefield. Elena watched, her heart pounding in her chest, as the Council's command ship erupted in a blaze of light. The fighters that had been surrounding it broke away, their targets destroyed. The battle didn't stop, but the momentum shifted. The Council had lost their flagship. Elena's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a victory. A symbol of humanity's refusal to submit, a reminder to the galaxy that they were a force to be reckoned with. As the battle continued to rage, Elena's mind raced ahead, calculating the next steps. There would be no easy victory, no clean resolution. But humanity had sent a message, one that would be remembered for centuries to come. The vanguard had delivered its blow, and now Elena Kovacs would lead humanity's fight, not for survival alone, but for its place in the galaxy. The war was far from over, but the first chapter had been written. The vanguard drifted through the silent expanse of space, its once pristine hull now scarred and battered. Yet, for all its damage, it still moved with purpose. The battle with the Council had stretched on for days, and though the tide had shifted in humanity's favor, the war was far from over. Elena Kovacs stood at the command center, her eyes fixed on the flickering holographic map, tracking the movements of both the Terran and Council fleets. We've made a dent, but not nearly enough, she muttered under her breath, eyes scanning the map for any indication of a breakthrough. The Council had retreated to regroup, but Elena knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The true test of humanity's resolve was yet to come. Kara Sloane approached, her expression tense but resolute. Admiral, Earth Command reports that reinforcements are en route, but they'll take at least another 12 hours to arrive. We can't afford to wait that long. The Council's forces are massing near the Proxima system. We can intercept, but we'll be outnumbered. Elena turned to face her, her face hard with determination. We take the fight to them. Now. We don't give them time to recover. Kara nodded sharply. Understood. I'll get the fleet ready for immediate jump. Elena glanced at the worn faces around her crew. The Vanguard's officers were exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally, but there was no hesitation in their eyes. They had made it this far, and they would see it through to the end. There was no other choice. The Proxima system loomed ahead, its blue star shining in the distance. Elena had calculated the risks. If they failed here, if the Council managed to regroup and crush the Terran forces, Earth and every colony humanity had ever established would be wiped from the map. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The Vanguard was flanked by a handful of Terran warships, their numbers small but their resolve unshakable. A dozen or so ships in total, against an entire fleet of the Council's finest war vessels. It felt like an impossible task, but there was no alternative. Admiral, we're within firing range, Kara reported from her station. Council ships are emerging from the Proxima system's outer edge. They're not holding back. Elena's jaw clenched. The Council had learned from their mistakes. They were coming in full force now, prepared to overwhelm anything in their path. Divert all fighter groups to engage their flanks. Let's draw them in. We need to keep their heavy hitters focused on us, Elena commanded. Kara gave a quick nod, issuing the orders. The fighter wings split off from the fleet in a dazzling array of coordinated precision, forming an aggressive offensive posture, pushing forward with full throttle. Elena could almost feel the tension in the air as their fighters launched in coordinated precision, disappearing into the darkness of space before engaging in a blur of gunfire and explosions. Deploying point defense grids, came the voice of Reeve, the tactical officer, over the comms. We'll need them with this many enemy ships in range. Elena watched as the Vanguard's point defense systems opened fire on the incoming enemy projectiles, laser beams lancing out to intercept missiles and fighter swarms. The sound of distant impacts reverberated through the ship, as though space itself was ringing with the energy of destruction. The first wave of Council fighters hit the Terran lines hard. They were fast, coordinated, and ruthless. The Vanguard's cannons fired, tearing into the incoming waves, but the enemy ships were relentless. Explosions erupted on the battle screen, and Elena winced as she saw a smaller Terran cruiser, the Resilient, detonated in a massive burst of fire. The loss was immediate, its remnants drifting away as debris in the vacuum of space. Damn it! Elena hissed under her breath. Keep pushing forward. Don't let them regroup. Kara's voice crackled through the comms. Admiral, their flagship has emerged from behind the asteroid belt. It's massive. They're concentrating all firepower on us. The screen flickered, and a massive warship, an intimidating sight, appeared, its hull gleaming with the strange metallic sheen of Council architecture. The flagship was unlike anything humanity had faced before, its weapons systems bristling with energy. Every particle of Elena's being told her that the next moments would define whether they survived or were consumed. Elena, they're charging their main weapon, Kara warned, her voice tight with anxiety. That ship isn't just here to engage us, it's here to wipe us off the map. Elena's eyes narrowed, and her hands tightened on the console as she adjusted their fleet's position. The Council was playing their hand now. They had superior firepower, superior ships, and superior technology, but they had underestimated one thing. Humanity would fight for its survival, no matter the odds. We need to disable their engines. If we can stop that flagship, the rest of their fleet will fall apart, Elena said, her voice steady and cold. She turned to Kara. Prepare the fighters for a high-risk run. We'll need every fighter on the line to breach that flagship's defenses. Kara hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Understood, Admiral. Minutes later, the battle intensified. The Vanguard and its fleet tore into the Council's formation, weapons flashing with the heat of desperation. A constant roar filled the command deck as the ship's systems struggled under the weight of sustained fire. We're losing shields, Reeve shouted over the din, his face grim as he worked furiously at his console. Main reactor is at 58%. If we don't pull back. No, Elena snapped. We push forward. Keep those shields up as long as you can. We're breaking their line. There was no hesitation in her voice. The battle was turning into a brutal slog, but it was their only chance. The flagship's deadly weapon was charging, and they needed to get in close before it fired. One shot from that behemoth could end the battle, and they would have nothing left to show for their efforts. The fighter wings surged toward the flagship, dodging enemy fire and weaving through an onslaught of missiles and plasma bolts. The Vanguard followed close behind, its cannons firing relentlessly at the Council's flanking ships, distracting them from the true target. Captain, we're closing in on the flagship's main reactor, Kara said, her voice taut. One more run should do it. Elena's mind raced. This was it. If they didn't breach the flagship's defenses now, there would be no more chances. The Terran fleet was battered, and the Council had its most devastating weapon aimed directly at them. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Elena ordered. We take out that reactor, then we take down the rest. The fleet moved in unison, converging on the flagship with terrifying speed. Fighter squadrons locked onto the weak points in the enemy ship's defenses, and for a moment, the Council's flagship faltered. Its guns stopped firing, and Elena saw the opportunity. Now! Elena shouted. All fighters, hit their core! The fighters dove forward, unleashing a barrage of missiles and laser fire into the heart of the flagship. A massive explosion ripped through the darkness of space as the flagship's reactor detonated in a glorious, violent bloom of light. The shockwaves swept through the surrounding ships, and the remaining Council vessels faltered in their advance. We've done it! Kara breathed, disbelief creeping into her voice. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, her breath heavy as she allowed herself a brief moment of relief. But this wasn't over. Not yet. The remaining Council forces, though disorganized, were still formidable. Their numbers were overwhelming, and despite the loss of their flagship, the fight was far from finished. Elena! Kara shouted, pointing to the screen. We've got one more problem. They're calling in reinforcements. Another fleet is en route from the Galactic Core. We've got maybe an hour before they arrive. Elena's fists clenched, but she didn't let the panic set in. They had won a crucial battle, but there was still much to be done. We've got 1 hour. That's all we need, she said, her voice cold with resolve. We'll hold. Humanity doesn't stop here. The Vanguard and its fleet fought through the final moments of the battle. The surviving Council ships continued to make their moves, but they were losing ground with each passing minute. The battle was turning in humanity's favor, but Elena knew the final push would require everything they had left. As the final Council ship exploded into a ball of fire and debris, Elena Kovacs stood at the helm of the Vanguard, her chest heavy but her heart alight with the fire of victory. Humanity had delivered its message. The war was far from over, but the storm was finally beginning to clear. The stars seemed dimmer in the wake of the battle. The Vanguard drifted through space, its once gleaming exterior now scarred, battered by the relentless assault from the Council. Its weapons systems were offline, its engines sputtering, but it was still functional. For now. Inside, the silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's remaining systems and the occasional crackle of the communication lines. Admiral Elena Kovacs stood at the center of the command deck, her posture rigid, her eyes locked on the holographic display in front of her. The battlefield was empty, but that calm was only temporary. The Council's reinforcements were on their way, and humanity had no choice but to meet them head-on. Kara, Elena said, breaking the silence. What's the status of the fleet? Kara Sloane, her second in command, appeared beside her, her face a mirror of exhaustion and resolve. We've lost 2 more ships, the Resolute and the Defender, but the rest are holding. For now. Shields are down to 20%, and our weapons are barely functional. Elena nodded, her mind racing. The Vanguard was in no condition to take on another full-fledged assault. They had no choice but to make the most of what little they had left. The remaining Terran ships, though damaged, were still operational. But without reinforcements, they wouldn't survive a direct confrontation with the full might of the Council. We can't wait for reinforcements to arrive. Elena muttered, more to herself than anyone else. We need to act before the Council gets here. We'll hit them hard, force them to bleed, and buy ourselves some time. Kara's brow furrowed. You're talking about a counterattack, Admiral. With what? We've got barely enough power to stay in the fight, let alone launch an offensive. I know, Elena said, her voice cold with resolve. But it's our only option. We can't let them regroup. We strike first, or we're finished. The Vanguard's engines hummed weakly as they moved toward the coordinates of the incoming Council fleet. Each second felt like an eternity, each moment filled with the silent weight of impending doom. Elena's thoughts were a jumble of calculations and possibilities, but there was no time for hesitation. They had to strike before the enemy could fully organize. We've got them on the scanner, Reeve, the tactical officer, reported. They're still 10 minutes out, but there's no mistaking it. The reinforcements are coming in hot. Elena's grip on the console tightened. Prepare the fleet. We'll meet them head on. The incoming Council fleet appeared on the horizon, massive and imposing, a wall of firepower coming toward them at an alarming speed. Their ships were enormous, sleek, and built for war, their presence a stark reminder of the imbalance in firepower that existed between humanity and the Galactic Council. But Elena was undeterred. She knew what the Council was capable of, they had already proven that, and more, but humanity had something the Council lacked: determination. Resolve. A willingness to fight when all seemed lost. We're outnumbered, Admiral, Kara said, her voice steady but laced with tension. They're bringing everything they have. We know the odds, Elena replied. But we've survived worse. We've won against bigger odds. We fight or we die. There's no other way. As the enemy fleet closed in, Elena gave the order to deploy every available fighter. The remaining Terran warships formed a defensive perimeter around the vanguard, but they were fragile. Their weapons were weakened from the previous battles, their shields nearly gone. The only thing left was their grit, their ability to strike when the moment was right. We'll have to make this quick, Elena said, her voice sharp as a knife. Focus all fire on their smaller vessels. We break through their lines and hit their command ship, take out their leadership, and the rest will fall apart. The fighters shot forward, a swarm of humanity's finest piloting their ships with unmatched ferocity. The vanguard and its accompanying fleet opened fire, unleashing everything they had left. The space around them erupted in violent bursts of light and sound. Plasma bolts streaked across the void, missiles detonated in brilliant explosions, and the shriek of weapons fire echoed through the ship. The battle was a brutal, chaotic dance, one that left little room for mistakes. We've taken damage to the port side, Reeve shouted. Shields are failing. Keep firing, Elena barked, her eyes never leaving the battlefield. She could feel the heat of the battle pressing in on her, but there was no time to consider retreat. They couldn't run. There was nowhere to run. A massive explosion shook the ship, and Elena staggered, nearly losing her footing. She grabbed the console for support, her heart racing. Report! Starboard thrusters are offline, Reeve responded, voice panicked. We're losing control of our positioning. The ship groaned under the strain, the lights flickering as the damage reports flooded the screen. But still, Elena stood firm. The vanguard wasn't done yet. Not as long as she was in command. We can still make it, she muttered under her breath. We can still win this. The enemy fleet closed in even further, their command ship now in direct line of sight. Elena's pulse quickened as she watched it grow larger on the holographic display. There was no more time for evasive maneuvers or finesse. This was the final strike, and it would be a fight to the bitter end. Now! Elena shouted. All remaining fighters, attack the command ship! We've got one shot at this. Take it! The remaining Terran fighters surged forward, weaving through the chaos, their weapons firing with deadly precision. The vanguard itself fired a salvo of its remaining missiles, hoping to cripple the enemy's flagship before it could retaliate. Admiral! Kara's voice crackled through the comms, sharp with panic. Their command ship is charging its main weapon. We've only got seconds. Elena's heart skipped a beat. The Council's flagship was preparing to unleash its ultimate weapon, one that could obliterate everything in its path. If they didn't stop it now, there would be no second chance. Push forward! Elena commanded, her voice unwavering. All ships, focus everything on that command ship. This ends now. The vanguard surged toward the enemy flagship, pushing through the waves of Council ships that tried to intercept them. The fighters flanked the command ship, launching one final barrage. The missiles tore into the flagship's hull, but the ship was far from crippled. It returned fire with devastating power, beams of energy slicing through space and striking the vanguard. Elena felt the ship shudder under the impact, the alarms blaring, the hull creaking. She gritted her teeth, but she refused to look away. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. We're almost there, Elena whispered. Just a little longer. The Vanguard fired again, a final, desperate shot aimed directly at the command ship's reactor core. The energy surge was blinding, the shockwave ripping through space. For a moment, Elena thought the ship had been destroyed, until the explosion came. The flagship erupted in a brilliant flash, its core detonating in a cascade of fire and light. The surrounding enemy ships were caught in the blast, their shields failing as the shockwave swept through the fleet. And then, there was silence. For a long, agonizing moment, the battlefield was still. The enemy fleet was in disarray, their leadership shattered. The remaining Terran ships were battered but intact. The fight had been brutal, but humanity had delivered the final blow. Elena stood at the command deck, staring at the remnants of the battle. Her breath was shallow, her body trembling from the adrenaline of the fight. The Vanguard had survived, but only just. Kara's voice broke through the silence. "Admiral, we did it." Elena nodded slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of what they had endured. "Not yet. But we've made them bleed. And now, the galaxy knows that humanity will fight to the bitter end." She turned to face her crew, all of them battered but still standing. "We've won today. But the war isn't over. Not until we finish what we started." And with that, the Vanguard set its course for the next fight, because humanity's fight for survival had only just begun. The stars stretched endlessly before the Vanguard, now drifting at half speed through the emptiness of space. Its hull was scarred, its systems a patchwork of makeshift repairs and urgent fixes, but it was still functional, still breathing. And so were they. For now. Elena Kovacs sat in the command chair, her hands resting on the cold armrests, her face lit by the soft glow of the console in front of her. Her mind was distant, her thoughts pulling her in 100 directions. They had won a massive victory. The Council flagship had been destroyed, the reinforcements annihilated. Yet, the war was far from over. Kara Sloane entered the bridge, her boots clicking softly against the floor. She walked up to Elena and stood there for a moment, her presence a quiet but unwavering support. "Admiral," she said, her voice calm but heavy with unspoken questions. "Earth Command is requesting an update. They want to know our next move." Elena exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. "Tell them to hold for now. We need to regroup. This battle wasn't a victory. It was a reprieve." The words hung in the air. A reprieve. The Council hadn't been obliterated, just forced to retreat for the moment. They were still out there, still formidable, and still more than capable of ending humanity's fight for survival. Kara's eyes narrowed. "The battle was bloody. But we've proven we can stand up to them. The tide is turning. Earth Command needs to know if we're continuing the offensive." Elena looked out at the distant stars, their cold light flickering like a distant promise. "We're continuing the fight, Kara. But not in the way they think. We can't afford to charge headfirst into the next battle with what's left of the fleet. We need to be smarter. We need to hit them where they least expect." The crew was hard at work, trying to piece together what was left of the Vanguard. Reeve, the tactical officer, was deep in the data, analyzing the results of the battle. His face was etched with fatigue, but there was no mistaking the glint of resolve in his eyes. "We took out their flagship," Reeve said without looking up. "But they're not finished. There's a remnant fleet still lurking in the galactic core. Earth Command doesn't know how deep the Council's resources run. We've cut their leadership down, but the Council will send reinforcements." Elena stepped forward, her boots making a soft echo on the floor as she approached Reeve's console. "And that's why we can't wait for Earth Command. We have to hit them again. We need to track their movements and preempt their reinforcements before they can organize." Reeve looked up, his brow furrowing. "We're running on empty, Elena. We don't have the firepower to stop them cold. If we strike too early, we risk losing everything we've fought for." "I'm aware," Elena replied, her voice firm. "But if we don't hit them now, if we let them recover, it'll be too late. They've underestimated us once already. We'll use that." The silence in the war room was deafening. The last remnants of the Terran fleet were assembled, the officers and commanders staring at the display screens with a mix of determination and doubt. Earth Command had sent an encrypted message, but it was unclear whether the reinforcements would arrive in time. Elena knew that this fight would be different. There would be no last-minute rescue. This time, humanity would have to rely solely on its own strength and ingenuity. The Council's strategy has been one of overwhelming force, Elena began, addressing her officers, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. But they've always believed in their superiority. It's been their mistake from the start. We know their tactics now. They believe we're outmatched. They don't see the heart of humanity. But we're going to show them. Kara stepped forward, her eyes sharp. And how do you propose we do that? We're not going to stop their reinforcements with a handful of ships. We don't have to, Elena said, her voice steady. We're not going to fight the entire fleet. We're going to hit them in their weakest point. We're going to target their communications hub. The officers exchanged puzzled glances. They'll have one, Elena continued, her eyes locking with theirs. Somewhere deep in Council space, a central hub that coordinates their fleets. If we take that down, we fracture their control. The reinforcements won't know where to go, they won't know what to do. We'll disrupt their entire network. Kara nodded slowly. A surgical strike. Take out their nerve center. Elena's lips curled into a thin smile. Exactly. The Vanguard's engines hummed to life, though faintly, struggling to reach full power. It was a calculated risk, but they had no other choice. The rest of the fleet followed in line, their hulls battered but ready for what was coming next. It wasn't much of a fleet, but it was enough for what they needed to do. The plan was bold, reckless, but necessary. Reeves' voice crackled over the intercom, his tone grim. We've got the coordinates for their communications hub. It's located in a deep system asteroid belt near the galactic core. It's a labyrinth, full of debris and traps. We're ready, Elena replied. This is it. No second chances. The Vanguard and the remaining Terran fleet descended into the asteroid belt. The mass of rocks and space debris created a chaotic battlefield, an ideal place for the Council to hide its most vital infrastructure. Elena's eyes were fixed on the display, every piece of debris, every shadow, every flicker of movement a potential threat. There it is, Kara said, pointing at a small, unassuming asteroid. It had no more importance than the hundreds of others surrounding it, but there was a faint energy signature emanating from it. That's where their communications hub is buried. Reeve looked at the readings, his face tight. It's well protected. Automated drones are patrolling the area, and there are several military ships in orbit. Elena nodded. We'll have to be fast. Take out the drones first. Disrupt their surveillance systems, and then move in for the strike. The fleet positioned itself, threading between the asteroids, careful not to alert the enemy to their presence. They had only one shot at this. The drones emerged from the shadows, sleek and fast, their weapons charged and ready to engage. Elena's heart raced as the first wave of drones closed in on their position. Engage! Elena shouted. The Vanguard fired first, its remaining weapons systems coming to life with a shriek of energy. The drones were quick, dodging and returning fire, but the Terran ships had the advantage of knowing how the Council operated. They moved as one, a well-oiled machine, each ship covering the other as the drones fell. Kara's voice crackled through the comms. We've cleared the perimeter, Admiral. The path is open. Elena's eyes burned with determination. Move in. Now. The Vanguard and its fleet surged forward, the asteroid belt now a blur of motion around them. Elena watched the comms feed closely, knowing that any mistake could spell their doom. Every ship, every maneuver, had to be perfect. As they neared the asteroid with the communications hub, Reeves' voice sounded again, tense and urgent. They've detected us. 2 Council warships are en route. They'll be too late, Elena said. We hit them fast and hard. Focus fire on their shields, take them down. Kara, get the fighters ready. We're taking out that hub. The Vanguard and its fleet fired in unison, a devastating volley of energy lancing out at the enemy warships. The Council ships retaliated, but the Terran ships were too quick, moving through the asteroid field with a precision that stunned their enemies. The first warship went down in a burst of flames and debris. Kara's voice came through the comms, her tone low and tight with focus. "We've cleared the warships. The hub is within range. Preparing for final strike." Elena's hand clenched around the armrest. "Do it." A volley of missiles shot toward the asteroid. The explosion was a brilliant burst of light, the asteroid disintegrating in a cascade of debris and energy. The communications hub was gone, completely obliterated. Elena exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The mission had been a success. "We did it," Kara said, a note of disbelief in her voice. Elena turned to face her crew, her face hard and unwavering. "This is just one battle. We've crippled their communications, but the war is far from over." As the fleet made its way back, Elena allowed herself a brief moment of reprieve. The Vanguard had done its part, and humanity had proven it could strike at the heart of the Council. But there was still so much left to do, so many battles to fight. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in a long time, Elena Kovacs allowed herself to believe. Humanity had shown the galaxy that it was not to be underestimated. And they would fight, no matter the cost. The Vanguard drifted through the black void of space, its damaged hull barely holding together after the intense battle. Elena Kovacs stood on the command deck, staring at the empty space in front of her. There were no more enemies in sight, but the victory felt hollow, empty. They had delivered a crushing blow to the Council's communications, but it wasn't enough. It never seemed to be enough. Behind her, the hum of the ship's systems was a constant reminder of what was at stake. The crew was exhausted, their nerves frayed from the constant pressure. But Elena knew they couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. Not until the Council was truly defeated. "We've made it this far, Admiral," Kara Sloane said, breaking the silence. Her voice was softer than usual, tinged with a weariness that matched Elena's own. "But we can't keep pushing them back forever. Sooner or later they'll bring in reinforcements that we can't handle." Elena turned to face her second-in-command, her face set in stone. "And we'll deal with them, just like we've dealt with every other obstacle. We're not done yet, Kara. We can't stop now." Kara nodded but said nothing more. They both knew the truth. Humanity was on the edge, and every victory came at a cost. The crew of the Vanguard had done what they could to repair the ship, but the damage was extensive. The ship's shields were barely functional, its weapons systems a patchwork of hastily installed parts. They were limping through space, running on fumes, hoping they could make it to the next battle. "We've got more damage reports coming in," Reeves said from the tactical station, his voice strained. "The starboard engine is offline, and the aft bulkhead is breached. We need to get to a dock for repairs, or we'll be sitting ducks out here." Elena rubbed her eyes, her mind spinning with possibilities. "We can't afford to go to a dock. Not now. If we stop, we risk giving the Council time to regroup. We need to press on." "But Admiral," Reeve protested, "if we don't get those repairs, we're not going anywhere. You're asking us to keep fighting a war with a ship that's falling apart. The odds are too great." Elena's gaze hardened. "I'm not asking, Reeve. I'm telling you. We fight. We survive. And if the Vanguard can't carry us any longer, we'll make sure humanity's message is clear. We won't be cowed. We won't give in." The tension on the Vanguard was palpable as the ship limped further into the unknown. With every passing minute, the risk of running into a Council fleet increased. Elena knew they were close to the heart of Council space, and if they weren't careful, they could be walking into a trap. But there was no choice. They had to press on. "We've got a fleet approaching, Admiral," Reeve called out. "It's big, too. No way we can avoid it." Elena's heart skipped a beat. They had hoped to avoid detection for as long as possible, but it seemed the Council had caught wind of their position. The countdown had begun. "Battle stations," Elena barked. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're not going down without a fight." The Vanguard surged forward, its engines pushing it as fast as they could manage. The incoming Council fleet was massive, dozens of ships, including several capital ships. Their weapons systems were fully functional, and their shields were far superior to anything humanity could muster. "We can't outrun them," Kara said, her voice tight with urgency. "We have no choice but to engage. It's our only shot." Elena took a deep breath, her mind calculating the best course of action. "We'll fight, then. Focus on their lead ship. If we can disable their command ship, the rest of the fleet might fall apart." The battle that ensued was nothing short of chaos. The Vanguard and its remaining fleet of ships fired relentlessly at the incoming Council forces, but the difference in firepower was staggering. Every shot that hit the Council ships felt like a small victory, but every return shot from the enemy sent shudders through the Vanguard. "We're taking hits!" Reeves shouted, his voice filled with panic. "The port side shields are failing. Hull integrity is at critical levels." Elena gritted her teeth. "Keep firing! We're not stopping until that flagship is gone." The Council's lead ship loomed large on the screen, its massive frame dwarfing the Terran ships around it. Every shot the Vanguard landed on it seemed insignificant in comparison to the damage it was dishing out in return. The entire ship was a fortress, and even the best weapons humanity had weren't enough to penetrate its defenses. "We need a plan," Kara said, her voice steady but filled with desperation. "This isn't working. We're not getting through." Elena's mind raced, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They couldn't just keep throwing themselves against this ship. There had to be another way. "Reeve," Elena said, her voice calm but commanding, "can we bypass their shields? Is there any way we can get a shot inside?" Reeves' fingers danced across the console as he analyzed the data. "There's a weak point in their reactor vent system. It's protected, but it's still there. If we can get close enough and fire at the right angle." Elena didn't wait for him to finish. "Get us close. We'll make a run for it." The Vanguard turned sharply, heading straight toward the Council flagship. The space between them closed rapidly, and Elena could feel her heart pounding in her chest. This was their last chance. They couldn't afford another mistake. "All ships form up," Elena ordered. "Cover us as we make the run." The remaining Terran ships followed the Vanguard, pouring fire into the Council ships in an attempt to draw attention away from their flagship's weak point. The Vanguard shook as the enemy fired back, but Elena's eyes never wavered from the target. The Council ship shields were still up, but the Vanguard was getting close enough now for the weapons to lock onto the weak point. "Reeve, now!" Elena shouted. With a steady hand, Reeve fired the Vanguard's remaining heavy weapons, aiming directly at the reactor vent. The blast hit the target with pinpoint accuracy, and for a split second, Elena thought they had missed. But then, the explosion was deafening. The flagship of the Council erupted in a violent burst of energy, its reactor venting in a cascade of sparks and fire. The ship shuddered, its shields flickering as the explosion ripped through its internal systems. "We did it," Kara whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Elena couldn't bring herself to smile. There was no time for victory laps. The rest of the Council fleet was still intact, and their retaliation would come swiftly. "We're not done yet," Elena said, her voice cold and steady. "All ships, focus on the remaining fleet. We need to finish this. Now." The battle raged on, but with the Council's flagship crippled, the tide began to turn. The Terran ships, battered but resolute, pushed forward, striking hard and fast. The Council ships, once so confident in their superiority, now faltered, disorganized in the wake of the destruction of their command ship. Reeves' voice came over the intercom, a note of victory in his tone. "They're retreating. The Council fleet is pulling back." Elena looked around the command deck, her crew battered but still standing. "We've won, for now." The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Elena stared out at the battlefield, the remnants of the Council fleet drifting aimlessly in space. The victory was theirs, but the cost had been immense. The Vanguard was barely operational, and their fleet was reduced to a fraction of what it had been. Kara walked up beside her, her voice low. "Do you think we can keep this up?" Elena's gaze never wavered. "We'll have to. We don't have a choice." Humanity had made its stand, and the galaxy had felt the weight of their defiance. But Elena knew the war was far from over. The Council would regroup. They would return. And when they did, humanity would be ready. "Prepare for the next fight," Elena said, her voice hard and resolute. "We fight. And we win. That's the only way forward." The Vanguard floated in the silent expanse of space, its silhouette dark against the backdrop of distant stars. The battle was over for now, but it had left its mark. Elena Kovacs stood on the bridge, her eyes trained on the tactical map displayed before her. The Council had retreated, but their defeat felt temporary. A hollow victory. She could still feel the weight of the enemy's presence in the back of her mind, waiting for the moment they would return with an even more powerful force. Reeve was at his station, eyes darting across his console. "We've done the impossible," he muttered, but the words were lacking in triumph. His face was pale, tired. "The Council's fleet is scattered, their command ship gone. But I'm still reading heavy activity from their base in the Drakkar system." Elena's jaw clenched. "They're licking their wounds, but they won't stay down for long. We can't afford to wait for them to regroup." Kara Sloane stepped up beside her, her face hardened by the war. "We need to keep pushing. One blow won't end this. But there's only so much left to throw at them. Our fleet's been stretched thin." "I know," Elena replied. "We're down to half our original force. Repairs are barely keeping us afloat. But this isn't over. We can't stop now. We have one shot left to break them. We have to hit their core." The war room buzzed with tension as Elena addressed her remaining fleet commanders. The Vanguard wasn't the only ship left, there were others, though their numbers were dwindling. Yet, the fight had to continue, even if it felt like a futile mission at times. "We know where they're holed up," Elena said, her voice clear but strained. "The Drakkar system. They'd been hiding there, rebuilding their forces, reorganizing. It's their last bastion. If we don't end this now, we may never get another chance." A commander from a nearby ship, Captain Zane, spoke up. "Admiral, if we strike at Drakkar, it's all or nothing. We'll be in their home turf. They've had time to prepare. We can't be sure we'll have the element of surprise." Elena turned toward him, her gaze unwavering. "We've never had the luxury of surprise, Captain. But what we do have is determination. Our fleet may be small, but it's alive. And as long as we're breathing, the Council won't have the final say." The Vanguard surged forward once again, leading the charge. The fleet, scarred, battered, and weary, followed closely, a testament to humanity's sheer will to survive. But even as they advanced, Elena knew it wasn't the fleet that would decide this war. It was the spirit of the soldiers, the resilience of the crew, that would determine whether they would make it through the final confrontation. The Drakkar system loomed ahead, a cluster of planets surrounded by dangerous asteroid fields and unstable radiation zones. But beyond that, it was a well-guarded system, a perfect place for the Council to regroup and prepare for the final push. Elena's mind raced. This wasn't just a battle. This was the culmination of everything humanity had fought for, their survival, their future. Reeves' voice crackled through the comms, pulling her from her thoughts. "Admiral, we're entering the Drakkar system. There's heavy patrol activity. It's a trap." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "No turning back now." The first skirmishes were small, the Council's outer patrols easily overwhelmed by the Vanguard and its fleet. But Elena knew better than to think this would be a simple fight. The true battle lay deeper within the system. The heart of the enemy's defenses was hidden in the shadows of Drakkar's central moon, a base so well protected that it had been untouched by previous strikes. The Council had learned their lesson. This time, they would fight with everything they had left. The fleet moved closer to the moon, weapons ready, shields raised, scanning for any signs of enemy movement. "We've located their main base," Reeves said. "It's on the far side of the moon, surrounded by a ring of orbital mines. They've booby-trapped the entire approach. Kara's eyes flashed. Perfect. They think we'll hesitate. Elena's hand tightened around the armrest of her chair. We won't hesitate. All ships prepare to engage. We take down the orbital mines first. Then we go for the base. The battle unfolded with brutal intensity. The Vanguard and the remaining Terran ships pushed forward, firing at the orbital mines with pinpoint accuracy, creating a safe passage toward the enemy base. The Council ships began to emerge from their hiding spots, their dark hulls sleek and imposing, their weapons charged and ready. We've got incoming fighters, Reeves shouted, his voice tense. They're launching everything they've got. Kara's voice came through the intercom. All ships engage the fighters. Take them down fast. The sky lit up with the flashes of laser fire as Terran fighters swarmed into the fray, engaged in a deadly dance with the Council's forces. It was chaos, a storm of fire and debris, and in the center of it all was the Vanguard, moving with calculated precision toward the heart of the enemy base. Elena's eyes were fixed on the base, but her mind was focused on the bigger picture. They had to cripple the Council's war production. If they could do that, they would force the enemy into a retreat. But the base itself was heavily defended. The walls of the installation bristled with defense cannons, shield generators, and automated turrets. We're not going to break through that defense easily, Reeve muttered, eyes locked on the readouts. We'll need a concentrated strike. Power down the shield generators first. Elena nodded. Get us in position. We'll hit their weak point. Kara, lead the ground team. The Vanguard charged into the maw of the enemy's defense, firing relentlessly at the shield generators. The Council ships gave chase, their weapons crackling with deadly force, but the Terran fleet fought back with equal ferocity. We've got one of the shield generators down, Kara said, her voice steady, even though the strain of the battle was evident. We're making progress. Keep pushing, Elena urged, her voice calm but firm. We can't stop now. The Terran fleet closed in, and then, with a deafening roar, the second shield generator fell. Elena's eyes locked onto the base, watching as the Council's defenses began to falter. The Vanguard moved forward, its weapons primed for the final strike. The ground team, led by Kara, dropped into the atmosphere of the moon, their descent fast and brutal. The landing zone was riddled with enemy forces, turrets, drones, and automated defenses. But there was no choice. They had to disable the main control center if they were going to put an end to the war. Kara's voice crackled through the comms as they made their way toward the heart of the base. Admiral, we're inside. We're hitting their control room. This will be the end. Elena's voice was tight with resolve. Get it done, Kara. Don't stop until the job's finished. Back in orbit, the battle continued to rage. The Vanguard and its remaining fleet tore through the remaining Council ships, but the true fight was on the moon. Kara and her team fought their way through the base's corridors, dodging automated fire and eliminating the remaining Council soldiers. Finally, they reached the control room. The doors slammed open with a metallic screech, and the team burst inside, weapons at the ready. The room was bathed in harsh artificial light, and at the center stood a massive control console, humming with power. Kara wasted no time. Reeve, I'm uploading the virus. We need to take their systems offline. Now. I'm ready, Reeve responded, his voice crisp with anticipation. Give me a few seconds. The air crackled with tension as Kara and her team held the line, watching the screens as Reeve's virus spread through the Council's mainframe. The lights flickered as their systems began to fail. Then, the console exploded in a brilliant flash, and the entire facility went dark. We've got them, Kara said, her voice full of triumph. Their systems are down. Elena stood on the bridge, staring at the tactical map. The Council's fleet was disintegrating. Their defenses, their production, everything was crumbling. She could feel the weight of the victory settling in, but it wasn't over yet. We've done it, Reeves said, his voice quiet. Elena took a deep breath. No. This isn't just the end of a battle. It's the end of the war. We've shattered the Council's control. They'll never recover from this. The Vanguard's crew had done the impossible. They had fought a war against an overwhelming enemy, and in the end, humanity had won. Elena turned to face her crew, a quiet resolve settling over her. This victory is ours. But the fight has just begun. We rebuild. We move forward. And we make sure no one ever forgets what it means to stand against tyranny. The galaxy had witnessed the rise of humanity, and now they would witness its strength.